For over 300 years, the Galactic Council had one simple rule about the third planet orbiting the yellow star called Sol. Stay away. Far, far away. They had good reasons for this rule, and Chief Xenobiologist Veltar knew every single, terrifying detail by heart. Veltar sat in his climate-controlled office on the peaceful world of Kepler 438b, staring at the data files that made even experienced scientists shudder. Sol 3 wasn't just dangerous, it was a nightmare world that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to land on its surface. The temperature readings alone were enough to make him grateful for his species' decision to evolve on a stable, predictable planet. The surface temperatures on Sol 3 swung wildly between extremes that would instantly kill most known life forms. In some regions, the heat could literally boil the internal fluids of a Centauri citizen, while other areas stayed so cold that even the hardy ice dwellers from the Rigel system would freeze solid in minutes. But that wasn't even the worst part. The atmospheric pressure readings made Veltar's breathing apparatus wheeze in sympathy. The crushing weight of Sol 3's atmosphere would flatten most council species like insects under a heavy boot. The gas mixture itself was a toxic cocktail that would burn the lungs of anyone brave enough or stupid enough to try breathing it. Oxygen. Levels that high were basically explosive, and the presence of water vapor in such quantities suggested an environment of constant, deadly humidity. Then there were the weather patterns. Veltar had spent decades studying atmospheric phenomena across the galaxy, but Sol 3's weather systems defied all logic and safety. Massive cyclonic storms raged across the planet's surface, with winds strong enough to lift spacecraft off the ground and tear apart reinforced structures. Lightning strikes carried enough electrical energy to power small cities, while precipitation events dumped corrosive water mixed with various chemicals onto anything unlucky enough to be caught outside. The planet's geological activity was equally terrifying. Massive plates of rock shifted and collided beneath the surface, creating earthquakes that could level entire cities. Volcanic eruptions spewed molten rock and toxic gases into the atmosphere, while the planet's magnetic field fluctuated unpredictably, allowing dangerous cosmic radiation to bombard the surface at random intervals. Even the biological data they had managed to collect from long-range scans painted a picture of absolute horror. The planet was crawling with predatory life forms, from microscopic organisms that could dissolve living tissue to massive creatures with teeth designed for tearing flesh. The plant life wasn't much better, with many species producing deadly toxins or developing thorns sharp enough to pierce standard protective gear. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Council had used Sol 3 as the ultimate example of why certain worlds should never be explored. It was the perfect cautionary tale, a reminder that the universe contained places so hostile that even thinking about landing there was dangerous. Military academies across the galaxy used Sol 3's environmental data in their worst-case scenario training programs. That's why the message from Deep Space Monitoring Station Kepler 7 seemed impossible at first. The junior technician who first reported the anomaly was certain his equipment had malfunctioned. Structured electromagnetic signals coming from Sol 3? Ridiculous. The planet was a sterile wasteland where nothing more complex than basic chemical reactions could survive, but the signals kept coming. Day after day, Kepler 7 detected organized transmissions originating from the surface of the Forbidden World. Not random cosmic radiation or natural electromagnetic phenomena, but clearly artificial. Patterns that suggested intelligent design. The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. Veltar authorized a second deep space scan using the Council's most advanced monitoring equipment. 3 different stations confirmed the impossible. Complex, organized electromagnetic transmissions were definitely coming from Sol 3's surface. The signals showed mathematical patterns, repeated sequences, and even what appeared to be different transmission protocols, all the hallmarks of an advanced technological civilization. The Xenobiology department went into emergency session. How could intelligent life exist on the galaxy's most dangerous planet? What kind of creatures could survive conditions that would kill every known species in the Council? And perhaps most frightening of all, if something could thrive in such a hostile environment, what would happen if it ever decided to leave its Deathworld and explore the galaxy? The forbidden zone around Sol 3 suddenly seemed far less secure than it had just days before. Ambassador Crindall stared at his reflection in the polished metal wall of his quarters and wondered how his life had come to this point. 3 days ago, he had been a respected diplomat with a comfortable posting on the peaceful garden world of Altair Prime. Now he was volunteering for what everyone assumed would be a suicide mission to the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Truth was, nobody else wanted the job. When the Galactic Council announced they needed someone to investigate the impossible signals from Sol 3, the entire diplomatic corps suddenly became very interested in their shoes. Crindall had watched seasoned ambassadors who had negotiated peace treaties with warrior species and handled first contact with gas giant dwellers all find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. But someone had to go, and Crindall had always been curious about the unknown. Besides, his career had already hit a dead end after that unfortunate incident with the Rigel trade negotiations. At least this way, if he died horribly on a Deathworld, people might remember him as brave rather than the diplomat who accidentally started a minor war over a mistranslated joke about fermented algae. The Sanctuary was the most heavily armored research vessel the Altarian Collective had ever built. Originally designed for exploring the interiors of gas giants, it could withstand pressures that would crush most spacecraft and temperatures that would melt standard hull materials. If anything could survive a trip to Sol 3, it was this ship. Crindall tried to find comfort in that thought as they approached the Forbidden System. His first shock came when they reached the outer edge of the Sol system. The sensors immediately detected artificial objects, lots of them. Not the crude metal fragments he had expected from some primitive civilization, but sophisticated satellites in perfectly calculated orbits. The formations were so precise that Crindall's navigation officer whistled in appreciation, a sound that came out as a low harmonic hum through his breathing apparatus. As they moved closer to Sol 3, the readings became even more incredible. Massive space stations orbited the planet, their energy signatures indicating advanced fusion reactors and artificial gravity systems. Smaller vessels moved between the stations and the planet's surface in regular patterns that suggested a busy, thriving spacefaring civilization. "Sir," his communications officer reported, her voice tight with disbelief, "I'm detecting thousands of separate artificial satellites around Sol 3. Their orbits are perfect, more precise than anything we've seen from Council worlds." Crindall felt his breathing apparatus work harder as his stress levels increased. This was not what anyone had expected. The Council's best scientists had assured him that if any life existed on Sol 3, it would be primitive organisms hiding in underground caves, possibly generating crude radio signals through some unknown biological process. Instead, he was looking at a technological civilization that appeared to be more advanced than many Council member species. The second shock came when he tried to make contact. Following standard first contact protocols, Crindall authorized a simple mathematical greeting. Prime numbers in sequence followed by basic geometric patterns. The universal language of intelligence that had worked with every species the Council had ever encountered. The response came back within minutes, but it wasn't what he expected. Instead of careful mathematical responses or cautious inquiry patterns, his translation systems picked up what could only be described as enthusiastic chatter. Multiple transmission sources were responding simultaneously, and the translations were confusing. "Welcome to Earth" came through clearly enough, along with coordinates for what appeared to be landing sites. But then the messages became more bizarre. The inhabitants of Sol 3, apparently called humans, seemed to be inviting him to visit their cities, try their food, and meet their families. One transmission even included what his computer identified as local weather reports, delivered in a cheerful, casual tone that made no mention of the deadly environmental conditions. Crindall ordered his communications officer to run a full diagnostic on the translation protocols. No species could be that casual about living on a Deathworld. The translations had to be wrong, but the diagnostics came back normal. The humans really were inviting him down to their planet's surface for dinner. They were offering to show him around their cities, recommending local attractions and asking if he had any dietary restrictions they should know about. One particularly enthusiastic transmission included what appeared to be a tour itinerary for something called Sol, which his sensors indicated was a massive urban center, directly exposed to Sol 3's hostile atmosphere. The most disturbing part was how normal they sounded. These weren't the careful, measured communications of a species barely surviving in a hostile environment. They sounded like people who genuinely enjoyed living on their planet and were excited to share it with visitors. Krindal realized that everything the Council thought they knew about Sol 3 was wrong. Dr. Hyunwoo Park checked his watch as he waited at Seoul Spaceport's VIP landing pad. He had been Earth's lead xenobiologist for 15 years, but this was his first time meeting an actual alien. The excitement was almost overwhelming, though he tried to maintain professional composure as the strange, angular spacecraft touched down with barely a whisper. The being that emerged looked like it was preparing for a hazardous waste cleanup operation. Ambassador Krindal wore what appeared to be a full environmental suit with multiple layers of protection, breathing apparatus, and sensors covering every inch of his body. The suit was so bulky that Hyunwoo wondered how the alien could even move, let alone walk around comfortably. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador," Hyunwoo said warmly, extending his hand in greeting before realizing the alien probably couldn't shake hands through all that protective gear. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Krindal's response came through speakers built into his suit, and even through the electronic translation, Hyunwoo could hear the nervousness in his voice. "Dr. Park, I must ask, are you not concerned about exposure to your planet's atmosphere? My readings indicate extremely dangerous conditions." Hyunwoo looked around at the bright spring day, confused. Seoul's air was cleaner than it had been in decades thanks to the new atmospheric scrubbers, and the temperature was a pleasant 22 degrees Celsius. A gentle breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the nearby park where families were having picnics. "Dangerous conditions?" Hyunwoo asked, genuinely puzzled. "It's actually quite nice today. Perfect weather for a walk, really." As they began their tour of the city, Hyunwoo noticed that Krindal's sensors were constantly beeping and flashing warning lights. The aliens seemed to flinch every time they passed a group of people, especially when children ran by laughing and playing. When they reached the main shopping district where thousands of people moved freely through the streets, Krindal stopped walking entirely. "This is impossible," the alien muttered, his suit's speakers crackling with static. "My instruments show atmospheric pressure that should crush most life forms, oxygen levels that are highly volatile, and temperature fluctuations that would be lethal to my species." Hyunwoo looked at the busy street around them, trying to see it through alien eyes. Office workers were grabbing lunch from street vendors, students were sitting on benches studying, and elderly people were doing their morning exercises in the small plaza nearby. It all seemed perfectly normal to him. "You call this a death world?" Hyunwoo asked, gesturing toward the bustling streets. "Wait until you see our Arctic research stations or deep-sea colonies." The alien suit made a sound that might have been a groan. "There are humans living in even more extreme conditions than this?" "Oh, absolutely," Hyunwoo said enthusiastically. "We have permanent research stations in Antarctica where the temperature drops to -40 degrees Celsius. People live there year-round, and some of them actually prefer it to warmer climates. And our underwater cities can operate at depths where the pressure would crush most submarines." Krindal's warning systems went into overdrive as they walked, past a group of joggers. These humans were running through what his instruments registered as hostile atmospheric conditions, wearing nothing but thin fabric clothing, and they appeared to be enjoying themselves. Some were even smiling and chatting as they ran. The situation became even more surreal when it started to rain. Hyunwoo simply pulled out a small umbrella and continued walking, but Krindal's suit immediately began flashing red warnings about hazardous chemical precipitation. The alien watched in horror as humans around them reacted to the rain with mild annoyance at worst, and some children actually began playing in the puddles. "Your sensors are detecting dangerous chemicals in this precipitation," Krindal said, his voice tight with concern. "Well, yes, there's some pollution in the rainwater," Hyunwoo admitted, "but nothing worse than what you'd find in most urban areas. We've cleaned up our emissions significantly over the past century." They stopped at a small cafe where Hyunwoo ordered coffee for himself and explained to the confused waitress that his guest couldn't eat anything due to dietary restrictions. Through the window, they could see Seoul's Han River, where people were kayaking, fishing, and swimming, despite what Krindal's instruments registered as crushing water pressure and dangerous aquatic life. You mentioned that humans swim in your oceans, Krindal said carefully. My preliminary scans suggest these bodies of water contain numerous predatory species and operate under extreme pressure conditions. Sure, there are sharks and other predators, Hyunwoo said with a shrug. But shark attacks are incredibly rare. You're more likely to be struck by lightning, and the pressure isn't really a problem unless you're diving very deep. Most people just swim near the surface. Krindal's suit was now making almost constant warning sounds. Dr. Park, I must ask, do humans consider your planet to be comfortable? Hyunwoo thought about it for a moment. Well, Earth has its challenges. Climate change has been an issue, and we've had to work hard to clean up pollution and manage resources. But overall, yes, most of us are quite happy here. It's home, you know? The alien ambassador sat in stunned silence, watching humans live their normal lives in conditions that his entire civilization considered unsurvivable. Everything he thought he knew about the limits of life in the universe was crumbling around him. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen chaos quite like this before. What was supposed to be a routine debriefing session had turned into something resembling a panic attack on an interstellar scale. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive chamber, and nearly all of them were talking at once. Ambassador Krindal stood at the central podium, still wearing his environmental suit even though he was now safely aboard the Council's orbital station. His report had been simple and straightforward, but the implications were shaking the very foundations of everything the galactic community thought they knew about life in the universe. Order, order, called Council President Zalthar, his four arms waving frantically as he tried to restore some semblance of calm to the proceedings. The translation systems were working overtime, turning the cacophony of alien languages into an understandable but overwhelming wall of sound. Representative Quintel from the Vega Collective was practically hyperventilating through her gill slits. You're telling us that an entire civilization exists on Sol 3? The Sol 3? The planet we use in our military academies as an example of absolute environmental warfare? That's correct, Krindal replied, his suit speakers crackling slightly. Not only do they exist, but they have a thriving technological civilization with billions of individuals living on the surface in direct exposure to the atmospheric conditions. The Andromedan representative, a crystalline being whose body was constantly shifting colors, turned a deep shade of red that everyone recognized as extreme distress. The atmospheric pressure readings you've provided would crush my people instantly. We evolved in low-gravity gas environments. Even thinking about that much atmospheric weight makes my molecular structure feel unstable. Chief Scientist Mordax of the Centauri Union had been quietly reviewing the data on his portable computer, but now he stood up with an expression that his species displayed when confronting something that challenged their understanding of reality. Mordax was considered one of the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy, and his research had helped establish the current standards for planetary habitability. Colleagues, Mordax said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems. I've been studying these environmental readings for the past hour, and I must share something disturbing. If these humans can thrive in such conditions, then what does that make the rest of us? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species in the Council had evolved on worlds that were paradise-like compared to Earth. Kepler 442b, home to the Centauri Union, had stable temperatures, gentle weather patterns, and atmospheric conditions so mild that most citizens never even experienced discomfort. The water worlds of the Aquatic Alliance had consistent temperatures and no weather variations beyond gentle currents. Dr. So Young Kim had been sitting quietly in the observers section, watching this display of galactic panic with growing amusement. As Earth's newly appointed ambassador to the Council, she was still getting used to alien customs and protocols, but this reaction seemed excessive even by the standards of beings who had evolved on different worlds. If I may interrupt, So Young said, standing up and activating her translation device. The chamber fell silent as dozens of alien eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on her. "I've been listening to your concerns about Earth's environmental conditions," she continued, "and I think there might be some confusion. Where I come from, we actually consider our planet to have pretty nice weather most of the time." The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. 3 representatives from low-gravity worlds immediately began showing signs of what their species considered cardiac distress. The Rigel delegates' breathing apparatus started working overtime, while 2 different crystalline beings began flickering rapidly between colors in what was clearly some kind of panic response. Medical teams rushed into the chamber as several delegates required immediate attention. The Andromedan representative had turned completely transparent, which their species only did in extreme shock. A gas giant dweller had inflated to twice its normal size and was floating helplessly near the ceiling. "Perhaps," So Young continued, trying to be helpful, "I should mention that many humans actually enjoy outdoor activities like mountain climbing, deep-sea diving, and desert hiking. We have people who choose to live in places like Alaska or the Sahara Desert because they find those environments interesting and challenging." More medical alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. The representative from Wolf 359 had fainted entirely, which was impressive considering his species didn't normally lose consciousness. Emergency medical drones were now hovering around at least 12 different delegates. Council President Zalthar looked around at the chaos in his assembly hall and realized that the galaxy had just become a much larger and more terrifying place. For thousands of years, the various species had assumed they represented the full spectrum of life's possibilities. They had established their understanding of physics, biology, and planetary science based on their own limitations. But if humans were walking around casually in conditions that would kill most council species, then perhaps those limitations weren't universal laws of nature. Perhaps they were just the boundaries of what had been possible for relatively fragile species who had evolved in gentle, protected environments. The most disturbing thought of all was beginning to dawn on many of the delegates. If Earth was considered a nice, comfortable place by its inhabitants, then what did that say about every other inhabited world in the galaxy? 12 months had passed since Ambassador Krindal's shocking report, and the Galactic Council was still trying to wrap their collective minds around the implications. The emergency restructuring of their planetary classification system had taken 8 months of heated debates, revised scientific models, and completely rewritten textbooks. What had once been considered the absolute boundaries of where life could exist were now just suggestions. Captain Minho Choi stood on the surface of Proxima Centauri b, breathing the thin atmosphere through a basic filter mask while his alien colleagues remained sealed inside their full environmental protection suits. The planet had been on the Council's never even think about landing here list for over 2 centuries. But to Minho and his human team, it felt like a slightly challenging camping trip. "The atmospheric pressure is about 60% of Earth normal," Minho reported into his communicator, addressing both his human crew and the nervous alien observers monitoring from orbit. "Temperature is holding steady at -15 Celsius. A bit chilly, but nothing we can't handle with standard cold weather gear." Through his helmet's communication system, he could hear Dr. Vexitar, the Altarian mission specialist, making worried clicking sounds. "Captain Choi, my instruments indicate that the atmospheric composition should be toxic to carbon-based life forms." Minho looked around at his team, who were busy setting up their temporary research station with the same casual efficiency they might use for a weekend hiking trip. Engineer Jong-Soo was assembling the power cells while humming a popular song from Earth. Biologist Hai Wan was already collecting soil samples, commenting cheerfully about how the mineral composition reminded her of the Gobi Desert. "It's a bit thin," Minho admitted, "but we've worked in worse conditions. Remember the Mars colonies before we finished terraforming? This is actually pretty comfortable by comparison." The alien observers had been preparing for this mission for months, bringing enough environmental protection equipment to supply a small army. The humans had packed their gear in 2 standard shipping containers and seemed to consider the whole expedition a relatively routine assignment. What bothered the alien scientists most was how normal the humans made everything look. When the wind picked up and started blowing dust around at speeds that registered as severe storm conditions on alien instruments, the humans simply pulled up their jacket collars and continued working. When the temperature dropped another 10 degrees as the local sun set, They just activated the heating elements in their clothing and kept going. "This is impossible," Dr. Vextar muttered to his colleagues aboard the orbiting research vessel. "The environmental conditions down there should require full life support systems. These humans are treating it like a minor inconvenience." The real shock came 3 weeks later when the human colonization team requested permission to bring their families to the newly established outpost. The council representatives monitoring the mission assumed this was some kind of translation error. Surely the humans didn't intend to expose their children to such hostile conditions, but that's exactly what they meant. Within 2 months, Proxima Centauri b had its first human families, complete with children who played outside in conditions that would kill most known species. The alien observers watched in fascination and horror as human children built snow forts out of frozen atmospheric condensation and complained that the gravity was too light and made jumping around too easy. Back on the Council's central station, President Zalthar was hosting the first Interspecies Cooperation Summit, an event that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to discuss the new reality that humans had introduced to their understanding of the universe. The summit's highlight was a live video feed from Kepler 442b, where humans had established the galaxy's newest research station. The planet had been considered marginally habitable by Council standards, good enough for careful scientific expeditions with extensive life support, but certainly not suitable for long-term settlement. President Zalthar watched the feed in amazement as human children ran around playing games in what his instruments registered as dangerous atmospheric conditions. Their parents were setting up permanent structures, planting earth crops that were somehow thriving in the alien soil, and establishing the foundations of what would clearly become a thriving human colony. Dr. In-hee Chang, President Zalthar, addressed the human scientist leading the Kepler 442b project. "Your people seem remarkably adaptable to conditions that our experts consider challenging at best." Dr. Chang smiled through the video link. "Oh, this place is lovely. The air is clean, the gravity is comfortable, and the weather is quite mild. Some of our colonists are saying it's even nicer than Earth in some ways. No hurricanes, no earthquakes, very stable conditions overall." Several alien delegates in the assembly hall began showing signs of stress again. What humans considered mild weather was still beyond the survival capabilities of most Council species. The universe had suddenly become a much larger place than anyone had imagined. For thousands of years, the galactic community had assumed that the harsh conditions on uninhabitable worlds represented the absolute limits of where life could exist. They had built their entire understanding of biology, physics, and planetary science around the idea that their own comfortable homeworlds represented the normal range of livable conditions. Humans had shattered that assumption completely. They hadn't just survived in impossible conditions. They had made those conditions look easy and comfortable. More disturbing still, they seemed to genuinely enjoy the challenge of living in environments that would kill other species. President Zalthar looked around at his fellow delegates and realized that everything had changed. The galaxy was no longer a collection of scattered habitable islands, separated by vast stretches of deadly space. With human help, worlds that had been written off as impossible were becoming new homes for expanding civilizations. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community. They had expanded its definition of what was possible.